Yeah, the basic idea with coal export is to dig up a tremendous quantity of coal in the Powder River Basin, to ship that coal in mile to mile and a half long trains down the Columbia River and load that coal. Well, first to make a big pile of coal in Longview, and then to load that coal onto ocean-going ships and ship it to markets in Asia, particularly in China. So for years, we had proposals all over the Pacific Northwest, and Longview had one of the largest proposals, 44 million tons of coal per year. All told, if you were to add up all of the different proposals around the Northwest, there were over 120 million tons of coal export proposed. This is really a staggeringly bad idea for the climate, obviously. This would have produced a huge quantity of climate changing pollution. So that was the obvious first problem with shipping coal all over the world, is that it was just absolutely recklessly contributing to the climate crisis. And so this was back in 2011, 2012, when these projects, it was sort of like a shotgun blast across the Columbia River and across the Northwest with different coal export proposals, Longview being one of the largest, second only to Gateway Pacific in northern Washington that had proposed 48 million tons of coal per year. As we dug into these projects, we found that there were actually very significant local impacts as well. So coal, when you pile a huge pile of coal on a site like this, it can lead to pollution in the water. And so coal can carry with it things like polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs, which are toxic pollutants. It can have metals like arsenic, which are obviously also toxic. People looked at the experience that others had living near coal export terminals and found that they had, at times, very high levels of particulate matter in the air, and were experiencing, respiratory issues with coal dust, but also particulate matter and diesel exhaust from the actual operations of these facilities. And so there was a real human health concern with the Longview export proposal. And so, there was a regional coalition called Power Pass Coal that formed in response to dealing with these very serious community level health concerns, and also this sort of global level climate concern. And then we, as Columbia Riverkeeper, were responsible for also keeping an eye on what does this mean for the Columbia River estuary, where a proposal like this would be situated. What did it mean to do this construction of a major coal export terminal in critical salmon habitat, to bring, mile-long trains of coal down through the Columbia River Gorge, spilling coal all along the way, that also were really important for the community, and people spoke to those very often in the hearings. And then ultimately, I think what kind of changed the course of the discussion was the opposition from tribal nations and tribal communities throughout the Pacific Northwest. And that was certainly true along the Columbia River, where we saw people throughout these tribal communities, and particularly, from tribal nations on the Columbia River, speaking very forcefully against the climate impact, but also the river level impact. And so, part of what happened was a really remarkable multiplication of issues and voices over the several years where these proposals kind of hung in the balance, and it ultimately led to most of the key permits for these projects being denied.
That's all.
Yeah, there's a couple moments I remember really well and really clearly. One of them is at the very beginning of this project in Longview, the governor of Montana coming to Longview to try to promote the idea of shipping Powder River Basin coal through Longview. And he said, the most important county in Montana today is Cowlitz County, Washington. And this was his pitch to try to get Cowlitz County to approve the permit. for this coal terminal. At the time, they were talking about building something much smaller, 5.6 million tons, and Cowlitz County actually went ahead and approved the permit. I actually bumped into Governor Schweitzer in the restroom while he was there, and we exchanged a few words. Friendly, very gregarious guy, and I just remember the impression that he got was, he said people were a lot less excited to see him than he expected, because there in that courthouse there were a whole bunch of people out front, protesting this coal export terminal, and who were concerned about the impact on the river and the impact on their community, and the idea of Longview just becoming a dumping ground for all of this coal coming from the middle of North America. And so there was this immediate pushback from Longview, which I think surprised a lot of people, coming from a community that has kind of an industrial reputation. And I think it surprised the governor of Montana. So there was this sort of disconnect between some of the elected leaders in Cowlitz County who had invited him in to kind of give this rosy picture of this coal export terminal, and the people in the community who very quickly realized that there were really high stakes. And so this was with, a few dozen people. And this is early on in the project. Years later, after Amber Energy, which became Millennium, after they were exposed and the full scope of the project became clear, that it wasn't 5.6 million tons, that it was actually 44 million tons of coal per year. And this was something that was exposed by amazing legal work from Earth Justice and Jan Hasselman, who caught this, this what they called Project Platinum. It was through the discovery process of actually challenging that Cowlitz County approval of the project. So we had to go through the process of legally objecting to the approval of that smaller proposal, and that's what led to the discovery of this larger one. So that triggered this big hearing in Longview, where they published an environmental impact statement. And literally weeks upon weeks of this team in Longview that had been building, who went door to door throughout Longview, reaching out to their neighbors, to church groups, to local health professionals, to anyone who would listen to them, to build this community of people who would speak up for Longview and speak up for a better future. And kind of the tagline was, we can do better than this. We can do better than coal, than being this just big, giant pile of coal. There were all these visuals that they would use to try to, convey in a very simple way what this would mean for Longview. And one was just showing all of those intersections blocked at the same time. Like, how are you going to get across the bridge if there's a bunch of coal trains blocking the traffic all the time, which was a real impact of the project. And then the other was just showing, what a mountain of coal is going to look like for Longview, what the airshed, imagining what the airshed is going to be like, with the prevailing wind blowing off the river, picking up that coal and kind of throwing it into the Highlands neighborhood of Longview. I think the moment that I remember emerging from that was people showing up to this hearing in Longview, and there being like 1,000 people wearing red shirts, which is what most folks were wearing at the time to show their opposition to the coal facility. And it just being a kind of shocking wake-up call for the coal industry coming into Longview, that they had way more opposition than they realized. And it was just galvanizing for the people in Cowlitz County to look around and realize how much support they had, not just from people around the region, but from people within Cowlitz County. There was a moment in the hearing, but two moments. One, I remember someone asked everyone in the room who opposed the project to stand up, and the vast majority of the room stood up at that point, which I think, the folks who were from the pro-coal group were not expecting to be so outnumbered. That was probably a difficult moment for them. And then Later in the hearing, someone from that pro-coal group came and said, all right, how many of you folks who stood up and who oppose the facility are actually from Cowlitz County? And all these people stood back up. And he said, oh, no, you're full of it. You're not actually from here. And then everyone sort of laughed and jeered, because there really were so many people from Cowlitz County who just saw the coal export terminal very clearly as a threat to the health and safety of their community, even while the whole region also saw this project as a massive step backward for trying to curb greenhouse gas emissions. So there's kind of these moments that, to me, were a picture of how things grew, and it was a real credit to the community organizing that our colleague, former colleague Jasmine Zimmerstucky was a huge part of, but also the local team from the Lower Columbia Stewardship Community in Longview. They just worked relentlessly to kind of touch different community members around them and get them engaged.